How Ibrahim Traoré defeated the French starvation weapon. The Sahel region was an unforgiving place, a vast, dry desert that stretched across Africa like an endless wasteland where the sun burned relentlessly and the earth cracked under the weight of its own thirst. The smell of dust hung in the air like a constant reminder of the land's hostility. There were no trees to offer shade, no rivers to quench the thirst of the land. Just sand, rocks, and the searing heat that could break even the most determined spirit. But there was one thing the Sahel had that no other place could claim: a fierce, unyielding heart. The people of this land were survivors, carved out of the same rock and dust that defined their environment. They were resilient. They had no choice. And their leader, Ibrahim Traoré, embodied that very resilience. Ibrahim wasn't a typical military leader. He wasn't someone who had risen to power through sheer ambition or thirst for dominance. He was a man forged in the fire of battle, shaped by the brutality of the world around him. But it was not just the pain of war that had defined him. It was the pain of seeing his people suffer in silence, slowly being crushed by forces beyond their control. The weapon they faced wasn't one of bullets or bombs. It was something far more insidious. It was starvation, a weapon of deprivation used not to kill immediately, but to break a people's spirit over time. This was the new tool of war that the French, under the guise of humanitarian aid, had unleashed upon the people of the Sahel. They had begun to deliberately withhold food supplies from the population, hoping that hunger would force them to comply with foreign interests, bending the will of the people to their control. It was a silent war, one that wasn't fought on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of those who were starving. But Ibrahim would not let this silent war take his people. He understood hunger. He understood what it could do to a person, what it could do to a society. But he also knew what it could never take from them: their spirit, their strength, and their sense of community. He would not let his people be reduced to mere pawns in a geopolitical game. And he would stop at nothing to ensure that the French weapon of starvation would fail. It began with whispers, rumors of French convoys transporting food supplies hidden away in secret locations guarded by French soldiers. It wasn't just food that was being hoarded. It was power. The French believed that by controlling the food supply they could control the people, and in their arrogance they assumed that the Sahel would fall to its knees, begging for their mercy. But Ibrahim knew better. He had lived through enough battles to understand that the true strength of a people could not be measured in food or resources. It was something far deeper, something far more powerful. It was the will to survive. He gathered his most trusted comrades, veterans of many campaigns who knew the land like the back of their hands. They were a mix of seasoned soldiers and young men eager to fight for their homes, for their families. Ibrahim laid out his plan, one that would be dangerous, daring, and if successful, could change the course of the war. They would take the food supplies back, not just for survival, but as an act of defiance. They would show the French that no amount of starvation could break the spirit of the Sahel. The operation was set for midnight. Ibrahim's forces moved like shadows through the dark, guided only by the stars and their intimate knowledge of the terrain. The convoy was scheduled to pass through a narrow canyon, a perfect ambush point. Ibrahim and his men took their positions, their breath steady, their hearts beating in unison. They waited in silence, their eyes scanning the horizon. As the convoy approached, Ibrahim's forces sprang into action. The raid was swift and silent. The French soldiers, caught off guard, had no time to react. Within minutes, Ibrahim's men had seized control of the convoy. The food was liberated, and the French officers who had been accompanying the convoy were taken prisoner. But there was more at stake than just the food. Ibrahim knew that the documents the convoy carried were just as valuable. They contained the names of collaborators, the locations of hidden stockpiles, and other vital information that could turn the tide of the war. The lead French officer was dragged before Ibrahim, his eyes wide with fear. The officer's uniform, once pristine, was now covered in dust and sweat. Ibrahim looked at him coldly, his gaze unwavering. He had seen this man before. This was not just a soldier, but a symbol of everything that had oppressed the Sahel for so long. "You think this is a war of hunger?" Ibrahim said, his voice low and measured. "But you are mistaken. This is a war for something far greater than food. This is a war for our dignity, our lives, and our future." The French officer looked up at him, his voice shaky. "You don't understand," he said, his words barely audible. "You think you can win this war with food? You're fighting an impossible battle. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us." Ibrahim's lips curled into a faint smile. "No, it's not bigger than us. You see, you've underestimated the power of a people who have nothing left to lose. You've underestimated the power of hope. And you've underestimated me." With that, the officer was taken away, his fate sealed. Ibrahim's forces now had the food, the documents, and the confidence to continue their fight. But the true battle was yet to come. The French were not going to let this theft go unanswered. They would retaliate. Ibrahim knew it. And when they did, his people had to be ready. Weeks passed. The French, enraged by their loss, launched a full-scale military assault on the Sahel. Tanks rolled across the land, helicopters screamed overhead, and the skies darkened with the fury of an unstoppable force. But Ibrahim stood firm. The weapon of starvation had failed, but now the weapon of violence had come. Ibrahim knew that this was the moment of truth. The French believed they could crush the spirit of the people with their tanks and their guns, but they did not know the heart of the Sahel. The battle was fierce. The French forces advanced with their superior firepower, but they were met with the fierce determination of Ibrahim's soldiers. The people of the Sahel, though hungry, were not weak. They fought with everything they had, with the knowledge that this was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for their freedom. Ibrahim led from the front, his presence an anchor to his people. He was not just a military leader. He was their symbol of hope. With every victory, no matter how small, the people of the Sahel grew bolder. They fought not just for their food, but for their dignity, their right to stand as equals in a world that had sought to crush them. As the battle raged on, Ibrahim's forces began to gain ground. The French, realizing that they could not break the spirit of the Sahel, began to retreat. It was a victory, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of the people. Ibrahim had shown them that no weapon, whether it was hunger, violence, or oppression, could defeat them as long as they stood united. The French withdrew, humiliated. Their weapon of starvation had failed. The people of the Sahel, under Ibrahim's leadership, had proven that the spirit of a people was stronger than any weapon they could deploy. Ibrahim stood tall, his heart heavy with the weight of the battle, but his spirit unbroken. As the sun set on the battlefield, Ibrahim walked among his people. They were weary, their bodies scarred by the fight, but their eyes were filled with a new light. They had not just survived, they had won. Ibrahim knew that the war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he could see the future ahead of them. A future they would shape, not with weapons, but with their own strength, their own will to survive. And as the wind swept across the Sahel, Ibrahim Traoré knew that the battle for the Sahel was far from over. But now the world knew. No matter what weapon the world threw at them, the people of the Sahel would always rise. Together. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more inspiring tales of hope, healing, and unexpected kindness. Hit the like button and share this with someone who needs it today.